Hey everybody, it's Ali here for another Nutrition Tip Tuesday. Today we're going to be talking caffeine, the wonderful, wonderful drug. So I'm going to discuss with you guys how caffeine acts on our body or on our brains primarily, and how much we should be having or not having, and how it might be able to help in some other ways. So this is a brain cell, it's really technical. In neural cells of the brain, we've got these receptors. When we wake up in the morning, we slowly start to accumulate adenosine. Adenosine is a chemical that makes us feel tired over time when it accumulates in larger amounts. So we wake up in the morning, we start to accumulate this adenosine, we start to feel sleepy, we kind of want a coffee. So this sort of will accumulate all throughout the day. By the end of the day, we fall asleep, and when we fall asleep, our body becomes really good at clearing adenosine. So when we wake up, we feel refreshed and ready to go. So sleep is a really good way to not feel drowsy, go figure. Caffeine has a really similar chemical structure to adenosine. So when we drink caffeine, what happens is it's an adenosine receptor antagonist, and it's a competitive one. So caffeine as a molecule competes for these binding sites in our brain cells and basically shoves adenosine out of the way and binds here instead of adenosine. It's a pretty competitive little guy. So essentially what happens is throughout the day, we still get a buildup of adenosine, but we don't feel the effects because it's not binding to those cells in our brain and making us feel drowsy. So caffeine kind of blocks that effect of adenosine. What happens over time though is that we adapt to drinking coffee, and instead of having a single shot like I usually do, we have a double shot, which is what I had this morning. So when that happens, our body becomes really good at going, okay, cool, I need some more, I'll just create some more receptors, and then you can feed me more caffeine, and then I'll have more of that effect, and I won't bind as many adenosine molecules. This is great, except for when you decide that you're not going to have a coffee in a day, because you've got way more receptors for way more of these guys to bind to, and this is that withdrawal effect where you feel actually pretty lousy because more adenosine is now binding to those receptors. And yes, we can adapt in the same way where we reduce the amount of receptors over time. So that is how caffeine acts on the brain. Caffeine's also really great for decreasing our rating of perceived exertion with exercise. So there are a number of other things that caffeine will act upon in terms of increasing heart rate, causing vasodilation, so we feel like we can exercise a lot more easily. And so caffeine can sometimes be something that's nice to have before a training session so that we get the most out of that session. How much should you have in a day? Most of the research points towards 400 milligrams, which is sort of 3 to 4 cups of coffee or standard shots, depending on where you go and how heavy-handed the barista is. So 3 to 4 standard shots of coffee is around about what you should have in a day. The reason being is that obviously caffeine can affect our sleep, whether we notice that it does or not. You might have a coffee at 10 p.m. and feel completely fine to go to sleep, but the way that it acts on your sleep quality can be impeded. It's also a stress on the body, so you can fall victim to over-caffeination, which has negative effects on areas like the gut and the way that the gut absorbs but then also signals. So for things like immunity, for example. So there are knock-on effects of having too much caffeine in a day, which you need to be mindful of. That's how caffeine works. That's how much you need to have. So bear that in mind and remember that the half-life of caffeine is about 3 to 6 hours. So that's how much caffeine will be out of your system in about half the dose that you had over time. So if you have a cup of coffee, there'll be about half that shot left between 3 and 6 hours depending on the person. So just keep that in mind for when you have your last coffee for the day in terms of when you usually go to bed. That's it for today. I will see you next week for another Nutrition Tip Tuesday.